My family called me the forgotten child until they saw my bank account. I don't carry many dark secrets. In fact, my life has been a testament to transparency and hard work, a direct reaction to a childhood spent navigating a fog of emotional neglect. But there was one secret, a colossal, life-altering truth I guarded for years with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard. It wasn't a secret born of malice, but of pure, unadulterated self-preservation. I always knew its revelation would be a cataclysmic event, a bomb dropped squarely on the fragile, carefully constructed artifice of my family. I just never imagined it would detonate so spectacularly in the middle of a Thanksgiving dinner, leaving a smoking crater where our dysfunctional family dynamic used to be. My story begins, as so many tales of familial strife do, with the birth of a sibling. At 36, I can now look back with a therapist's level of clarity and pinpoint the precise moment I was relegated to the role of the forgotten child. I was 9 years old, and my life, a predictable and relatively happy existence, was abruptly cleaved in two by a frantic 3 a.m. phone call. My Aunt Jen was on the other end, her voice a tense whisper that sliced through the quiet of our suburban home, a sound that would become a harbinger of my frequent exiles. "Pack a bag, Taylor," she'd said, her tone leaving no room for questions. "Your mom's in the hospital. The baby's coming." My mother was pregnant, and my sister, Charlotte, was making her grand, premature entrance into the world a full 2 months ahead of schedule. Those first few weeks were a disorienting, terrifying blur of sterile hospital corridors, the pervasive, antiseptic smell of disinfectant, and hushed, worried conversations that always seemed to stop the moment I entered a room. Charlotte was impossibly, frighteningly tiny, a fragile creature of translucent, paper-thin skin, and a bewildering web of tubes and wires that seemed to dwarf her small form. She looked less like a baby and more like one of my delicate, antique porcelain dolls, a comparison that earned me a sharp, stinging slap on the back of my hand from my father when I tried to gently touch the smooth, clear wall of her incubator. "Don't you dare," he'd hissed, his eyes, wide with a terror I couldn't comprehend, boring into mine. That was the first time I felt it, an invisible, impenetrable barrier forming between me and the two people who were supposed to be my anchors, my protectors, my world. When Charlotte was finally deemed strong enough to come home, our house transformed overnight from a warm, lived-in home into a cold, sterile medical facility. My mother, consumed by a fierce, primal fear born from the trauma of a previous miscarriage, became a 4-star general in a relentless, microscopic war against germs. Industrial-strength disinfectant became our home's signature scent, a chemical tang that hung in the air and clung to the back of my throat. Hand sanitizer stations were installed in every room like religious fonts, and we were required to use them upon entry and exit. The constant, methodical cleaning, the acrid, nose-burning smell of bleach that permeated every carpet fiber and fabric became the soundtrack and the scent of my adolescence. To this day, the smell of bleach can trigger a full-blown, heart-pounding anxiety attack. This state of hypervigilance, this obsessive-compulsive need for a germ-free environment, would have been understandable, perhaps even bearable, if it hadn't come with a cruel and deeply personal corollary. The moment I showed the slightest, most insignificant sign of illness, a single sniffle, a dry cough, an errant, allergy-induced sneeze, I was unceremoniously exiled. My dad would pack a small, pre-prepared bag for me, and I would be shipped off to either my Grandma Dorothy's cozy, cookie-scented house on the other side of town, or my Aunt Jen's quiet, book-filled apartment, which was a sanctuary of calm and order. At first, my 9-year-old brain processed these frequent banishments as a sort of mini-vacation. Grandma Dorothy, a woman whose love was as warm and comforting as the kitchen she presided over, would let me help her bake, her warm, flour-dusted hands a stark and welcome contrast to my mother's perpetually sanitized, latex-gloved ones. Aunt Jen, a high school English teacher with a passion for literature, had a floor-to-ceiling library of classic novels that I devoured with a hunger I didn't know I possessed. But the novelty of these escapes quickly wore off, replaced by the cold, hard, and painful realization of what was actually happening. I was being quarantined, not just from my medically fragile sister, but from my family itself. I was a potential contaminant, a walking, breathing threat to the precious, delicate life that had become the sole and all-consuming focus of my parents' world. I started taking absurd, almost comical precautions, wearing triple layers of leggings in the dead of winter, washing my hands until they were red and raw, all in a desperate, futile attempt to avoid the banishment that felt more and more like a profound and personal rejection. But it was a losing battle. All their attention, all their emotional energy was a finite resource, a well from which they drew, and it was being poured exclusively, and without reservation, into Charlotte. Desperate for even a single drop of that affection, for a sliver of the approval they so lavished upon my sister, I launched a one-girl campaign for their attention. I became the platonic ideal of a perfect, trouble-free child. I got straight A's. I joined the student council. I won every science fair and spelling bee my school offered. I memorized and recited complex poetry in Spanish, a language I was teaching myself in my spare time, hoping that my achievements, my sheer, undeniable excellence, would finally be enough to pierce their Charlotte-centric bubble. It never was. I vividly remember standing in the center of our living room, my heart pounding with a nervous pride as I flawlessly recited a complex Spanish sonnet. My dad's only response was a curt, "That's nice, Taylor, but don't stand so close to Charlotte. We don't want you spitting on her." The real gut punch, the moment that finally, irrevocably extinguished the last flickering ember of hope in my 13-year-old heart, came on the night of the annual school talent show. I had spent months, countless solitary hours after school, teaching myself to play Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water on our dusty, out-of-tune piano. It was a complex, beautiful, and deeply emotional piece, and I had perfected it. I was so proud, so nervous, so excited to finally have a single, solitary moment to shine. Coincidentally, Charlotte came down with a low-grade fever that afternoon. It was nothing more than a common cold, a minor inconvenience in any other household. But in our house, a sniffle from Charlotte was treated with the gravity and urgency of a national emergency. I stood on that stage, the bright, hot lights making my palms sweat, my hands trembling over the piano keys, and I played my heart out. And when I looked out into the vast, cavernous audience, into the sea of proud, smiling, familiar faces of my classmates' parents, the space where my own parents should have been was a dark, empty, gaping void. 2 weeks later, the entire extended family, including both sets of grandparents who lived a 3-hour drive away, dutifully and enthusiastically filed into the same school auditorium for Charlotte's 15-minute recorder recital of Hot Cross Buns. The injustice of it all was a sharp, physical pain in my chest. Charlotte, for her part, was no fool. She saw the immense power she wielded, the way the entire family ecosystem bent and contorted itself to her will, and she learned to exploit it with a chilling and sophisticated proficiency. By the time she was 8, she had long outgrown any genuine, lingering health concerns, but the performance of fragility had become her greatest and most effective tool. A faint headache on a school day meant she got to stay home and watch television while I was at school. Feeling too tired to do her chores meant that I was automatically tasked with doing them for her. A hint of manufactured anxiety before a big test would prompt my mother to call the school and demand an extension on her behalf. She was the perpetual victim, the fragile, delicate flower, and I was the sturdy, unremarkable, and perpetually overlooked weed growing in her shadow. I retreated further and further into the quiet, predictable sanctuary of my bedroom, burying myself in the fascinating worlds of art history and antique jewelry, subjects I had first discovered in the dusty, forgotten books in my high school's underfunded library. My room became my fortress, the one place in our house where I was safe, largely because Charlotte had once, in a fit of pique, claimed to be allergic to my vanilla-scented air freshener, and my mother had immediately and irrevocably declared it a Charlotte-free zone. The dynamic of my frequent exile shifted. I no longer dreaded being sent away. I began to crave it. A sick day, whether it was mine or hers, meant a trip to Grandma Dorothy's, where I was not an afterthought, but a person of interest. She would ask about my day, about the debate team, about the books I was reading. She listened, truly listened, and it was she who first noticed and nurtured my burgeoning, all-consuming interest in vintage jewelry. She would open her own worn, velvet-lined jewelry box, showing me the delicate, intricate pieces she had inherited, and telling me their stories. She became the motherly figure I so desperately needed, a quiet, steady presence in the turbulent sea of my adolescence. Meanwhile, my own parents spoke of me, if they spoke of me at all, only in abstract, convenient terms that served to justify their neglect. Oh, Charlotte just needs more attention because she had such a rough start in life. Taylor's always been so independent. She doesn't need us as much. Taylor understands that her sister has special needs. But I didn't understand. I was a child, a teenager, who couldn't comprehend why having a robust immune system and a self-sufficient nature made me less deserving of love, of attention, of even a fraction of the consideration they so lavishly bestowed upon my sister. But that neglect, that constant, grinding state of being invisible, had an unintended and ultimately empowering side effect. It taught me a profound and radical form of self-reliance. When no one is checking your homework, when no one cares about your achievements, when no one is even really watching you, you learn to become your own cheerleader, your own advocate, your own parent. And in that invisibility, I found a strange, exhilarating, and ultimately life-altering freedom. To say I took advantage of it would be a colossal understatement. In the shadows of my family's benign neglect, I quietly, meticulously, and with a single-minded determination, began to change the entire course of my life. I threw myself into every extracurricular activity that didn't interfere with my increasingly demanding part-time job at Murphy's Diner. The owner, Barb, a gruff, no-nonsense woman with a hidden heart of gold, became another of my surrogate mothers. She was the one who remembered my 17th birthday when my own parents forgot, slipping me an extra $20 and a massive slice of her famous apple pie with a gruff, "Don't tell anyone." I joined the debate team, and in the structured, logical, and ruthless world of argumentation, I found my voice. There is a deeply satisfying and empowering feeling in systematically dismantling an opponent's argument with cold, hard facts while maintaining a perfect, unruffled, and unassailable composure. It was a skill that would prove invaluable later in life. I won the state championship twice. My parents couldn't attend either of the competitions. Charlotte had soccer games on both of those days. She was on the C team and spent most of the games sitting on the bench, but her presence, her potential need for support, was, as always, the priority. My junior year was the year I truly went supernova, the year my quiet, behind-the-scenes rebellion began to bear real, tangible fruit. I took the SAT and, through a combination of relentless, obsessive studying and a natural, untapped aptitude for standardized tests, I achieved a perfect score. A 1,600. I remember staring at the results on the flickering screen of a library computer for a solid 20 minutes, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Convinced it was a glitch in the system. In a moment of foolish, residual hope, a last, dying gasp of the little girl who still craved her parents' approval, I rushed home to tell them. My mother was in the kitchen, her back to me, patiently and with an almost saintly level of attention, helping Charlotte with her English homework. I burst into the room, the acceptance letter clutched in my sweaty hand, my heart pounding with a nervous, uncharacteristic pride. "Mom, look. I got a perfect SAT score. A 1,600. She glanced up from Charlotte's essay on the Great Gatsby, a flicker of something annoyance? Indifference in her eyes. "That's nice, honey," she said, her voice flat and dismissive. "But could you please keep it down? Charlotte is trying to concentrate. She has a big test tomorrow, you know." Charlotte, not missing a beat, chimed in with her usual brand of casual cruelty. "Yeah, some of us actually have to study, Miss Perfect." My mother just patted her arm, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a slap in my face. "Don't stress, sweetie," she cooed. "You're just a different kind of learner." I still have the hard copy of that perfect score somewhere, tucked away in a box of old memories. It never made it to the hallowed ground of the family refrigerator door, a space that was, at that very moment, proudly displaying Charlotte's latest C+ English paper, held in place by a "We're so proud of you" magnet. The college application process was, by necessity, a solitary and clandestine operation. I applied to 15 of the top universities in the country, writing my own deeply personal essays, gathering my own glowing letters of recommendation, and single-handedly navigating the labyrinthine and soul-crushing world of financial aid paperwork. My guidance counselor, a kind, overworked woman named Ms. Wilson, became my de facto college advisor, staying late with me on multiple occasions to help me decipher the FAFSA forms that my parents were consistently too busy to even look at. Then, like a reward for all my secret, solitary efforts, the acceptances began to roll in. Thick, impressive, and deeply satisfying envelopes from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Northwestern, each one accompanied by a generous, life-altering scholarship offer. I kept them hidden, a secret treasure trove, in a locked box under my bed, knowing with a weary certainty that their revelation would somehow be twisted and contorted into a problem for Charlotte. The day I received my full-ride offer from Northwestern, a prestigious academic scholarship that covered every last penny of tuition, room, and board, was the same day that Charlotte, after 3 failed attempts, finally made the junior varsity cheerleading squad. Guess which achievement was celebrated with a festive family dinner at the Olive Garden? I ate a sad, lonely bowl of microwaved mac and cheese in my room that night, but for the first time, I didn't care. That scholarship wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was my golden ticket, my declaration of independence, my escape plan. The day the official, glossy acceptance package arrived in the mail, I took it to my favorite spot, a quiet, sun-drenched third-floor window seat in the local library, and I cried for an hour. Not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated, and overwhelming relief. When I finally, officially, told my parents at dinner that I would be attending Northwestern in the fall, their reaction was not pride, but a familiar, weary, and deeply ingrained concern for their other, more fragile daughter. "But Taylor, that's so far away," my dad said, his brow furrowed with a worry he had never once shown for me. "What if Charlotte needs you for something?" My mother, always more direct in her priorities, was even blunter. "I hope you're not expecting us to help out with your expenses," she said, her tone a clear warning. "You know, Charlotte's cheerleading competitions are very expensive." Charlotte, of course, was ecstatic. "Oh my God, does this mean I can finally have your room?" she squealed, her eyes already mentally redecorating my small sanctuary. "I need more space for my TikTok videos." The summer before I left for college was a blur of double shifts at the diner, a frantic, joyless effort to save every penny I could for books and living expenses. My parents, unsurprisingly, couldn't make it for move-in day. Charlotte had a very important, can't-miss cheerleading competition that weekend. Aunt Jen, my quiet, steadfast ally, drove me the 4 hours to the beautiful, sprawling campus in Evanston. She helped me haul my 2 battered suitcases and a single box of books up to my tiny, cinderblock dorm room. Before she left, she pressed a crumpled, worn envelope into my hand. "Your Grandma Dorothy wanted you to have this," she said, her own eyes misty with a pride my own mother had never shown me. "She's so proud of you, Taylor." "We all are." Inside was $500 in cash. I learned later from Aunt Jen that my grandmother had been painstakingly saving that money, bit by bit, from her meager Social Security checks for months. That first night, alone in my small, sterile dorm room, the reality of my hard-won freedom was so overwhelming it was almost painful. I sat on my new, unfamiliar bed and made myself a promise then, a silent, solemn vow to that lonely 9-year-old girl who used to be sent away for sneezing. I was going to build a life for myself so full, so successful, so undeniably brilliant, that being overlooked, being invisible, would no longer be an option. Not for them, but for me. College was a revelation, a 4-year-long deep breath of fresh, intellectual air after a lifetime of suffocating in the stale, recycled atmosphere of my family's dysfunction. I majored in art history, a field that felt like a natural and deeply personal extension of my childhood love for Grandma Dorothy's jewelry box and the stories she told. I found my tribe in the Antiques Appreciation Society, a delightfully nerdy and passionate group of students who were as obsessed with vintage jewelry techniques and historical provenance as I was. I even organized a small but surprisingly successful exhibition of borrowed pieces from local collectors in the student union, a project that required me to network, negotiate, and develop my first real, tangible business skills.
I graduated summa cum laude.
My parents missed the ceremony. Charlotte was in the process of transferring to her 3rd college in 2 years and, once again, needed help moving into her new dorm. My first job out of college was at a prestigious, old-money auction house in Chicago. I started at the very bottom, in the cavernous, dusty warehouse of the estate sales division, cataloging the mundane, forgotten remnants of other people's wealthy, well-lived lives. It was tedious, unglamorous work, but it was a foot in the door of a world that fascinated me. My big break came unexpectedly from the seemingly unremarkable estate of a woman named Mrs. Westfield. She was a childless widow who had left behind what was assumed by my superiors to be a vast and utterly worthless collection of gaudy costume jewelry. But as I was sifting through a tangled, glittering pile of rhinestones and faux pearls, something caught my eye. An Art Deco brooch, elegant, geometric, and understated. It felt too heavy in my hand for simple costume jewelry, and the intricate, sophisticated clasp mechanism on the back was a detail that screamed quality. I spent my lunch breaks for the next 2 weeks in a deep, obsessive dive of research, and my gut feeling, my years of quiet, solitary study, paid off. It wasn't a knockoff. It was a rare, signed 1925 Cartier piece, part of a limited, bespoke collection that had been made for a European duchess. It sold at auction for $42,000. My boss, a stern, intimidating man named Mr. Parker, started to notice me after that. He began giving me more interesting pieces to authenticate, testing my knowledge and my reputation within the auction house for having an eye began to grow. I threw myself into my work with a single-minded, almost fanatical devotion. I took online gemology courses at night. I spent my weekends at dusty estate sales and antique fairs, not to buy, but to study, to learn, to train my eye. 2 years into my job, I uncovered another lost treasure, a delicate, ethereal Art Nouveau necklace from a famous French jeweler. A piece that had been documented in historical records, but was long thought to have been lost or destroyed during World War II. It sold for $218,000. The day after the auction, Mr. Parker called me into his vast, intimidating, wood-paneled office. "Taylor," he said, getting straight to the point in his usual, no-nonsense manner, "you're wasting your talent here. You should be running your own authentication business." The idea was terrifying, a leap into an abyss of uncertainty and financial risk. But it took root, a persistent, tantalizing seed of possibility. I started freelancing on the side, and the work, through word of mouth in the tight-knit world of high-end antiques, came pouring in. Private collectors, estate lawyers, even my old auction house began to hire me for my specialized knowledge and my meticulous attention to detail. I took out a loan against my used car. I emptied my meager savings account, and I rented a tiny, sad, and slightly depressing office space above a Chinese restaurant that perpetually and overpoweringly smelled of Kung Pao chicken. The first few months were a terrifying, hand-to-mouth existence, a constant, gnawing anxiety of impending financial ruin. But then, a major collector hired me to authenticate a massive, multi-generational Victorian collection. In it, I discovered two extremely rare, historically significant pieces that had been misidentified for decades as later reproductions. My 10% commission on their subsequent sale was $76,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. My business exploded after that. I hired my first employee, a brilliant but shy recent gemology graduate named Mia, who reminded me far too much of my younger self. We moved to a proper, respectable office downtown, leaving the lingering smell of Kung Pao chicken behind us forever. We built a team of specialists, and our company developed a sterling reputation for expertise and, more importantly, for absolute discretion. The world of high-end jewelry, it turns out, is a world of secrets. I was flown on private jets to authenticate collections in Dubai and Geneva, a trusted, silent expert for celebrities and oligarchs. I was even quoted anonymously in a Forbes article about the booming market for historical artifacts. And through it all, my family remained blissfully, willfully, and almost comically ignorant. They still thought I worked at a little antique shop. I started sending them anonymous monthly bank transfers, a secret subsidy to help with Charlotte's endless stream of expenses and my father's mounting medical bills. I started at $5,000 a month, and then, when Charlotte announced she was going back to school for an MBA at a ridiculously expensive private university, I upped it to $7,000. They never questioned where the money came from, and Charlotte, I'm sure, happily took credit for somehow inspiring the family's sudden and mysterious good fortune. The secret became my private, bitter, and deeply satisfying joke. I would sit at their Sunday dinner table, wearing a vintage Patek Philippe watch worth more than my sister's car, and listen to her drone on about her latest triumph at her entry-level marketing job. The cognitive dissonance was becoming a strain, a bizarre double life that was growing harder and harder to maintain. I was living a life beyond their wildest imaginations, all while playing the role of Taylor, the disappointing, underachieving daughter. The breaking point, the grand, spectacular implosion I had both dreaded and secretly, on some level, craved, finally came, as so many family dramas do, on Thanksgiving. My mother, suffering from a painful herniated disc, was, for the first time in her life, unable to cook the massive holiday meal. I, tired of her perpetually dry, overcooked turkey and wanting to do something genuinely nice, offered to have the entire meal catered. I hired a high-end company I often used for corporate events, a meal that cost more than my parents believed I earned in 2 months. In the middle of the otherwise delicious dinner, I had to step away to monitor a major online auction in Hong Kong for a client. I left my work laptop open on the desk in my old bedroom. Charlotte, in a fit of what I can only assume was a desire to finally, publicly, expose how pathetic and insignificant her older sister's antique shop job was, grabbed my laptop and carried it triumphantly into the dining room. "Let's all see what kind of important, high-powered work Taylor is doing on Thanksgiving," she announced with a theatrical flourish, flipping the screen around for the entire, wine-soaked family to see. The room went completely, utterly silent. On the screen, in stark, undeniable, and brightly lit black and white, was my company's live financial dashboard, current operating account balance, for $0.7 million. Pending authentication contract, client A, $425,000. Recent transaction, Park Burnett auction, $1.2 million. Most recent quarterly profit report, $3.8 million. Charlotte's face cycled through 5 distinct and fascinating shades of shock, confusion, and nausea. My mother, after a moment of stunned silence, started laughing, a high-pitched, hysterical, and slightly unhinged sound. "Oh, Emma, don't be silly," she choked out between gasps of laughter. "That's just one of Taylor's silly little games. She works at that little antique shop, remember?" I stood up, calmly smoothing out the front of my deceptively simple cashmere sweater, a piece that had cost more than their monthly mortgage. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the thick, uncomfortable silence, "I own one of the largest and most respected jewelry authentication companies in the country. I have for years." My father choked on his wine, sputtering into his napkin. My Aunt Jen dropped her fork with a loud clatter. My mother's laughter died in her throat, her face turning from a bright, amused pink to a dark, mottled purple. "You have millions?" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound of pure, unadulterated rage. You have millions of dollars, and you let us struggle? Struggle. I shot back, the dam of my own long-suppressed anger finally beginning to crack. I send you $7,000 every single month. But your sister has student loans, she cried, her priorities, even in this moment of shocking revelation, perfectly, painfully clear. And there it was. Not pride, not shock, not even a hint of curiosity about the life I had built for myself. Just a raw, grasping, and instantaneous entitlement to my success. The next few hours were a chaotic, ugly blur of screaming, crying, and bitter accusations. I finally walked out, leaving them to their greed and their shock. The harassment campaign began within the hour. The texts, the calls, the social media tirades, all demanding, not asking, for a share of the success they had never once acknowledged or supported. They even had the audacity to show up at my office, demanding trust funds, a new car for Charlotte, and a beach house in Florida for their retirement. I had security escort them out. It has been 6 months since that disastrous Thanksgiving. I have moved to a new, unlisted address. I have changed my phone number. I have had my lawyer issue a formal and legally binding cease and desist letter. My grandmother, when my mother called her to complain about my betrayal, had the perfect and final response. Good for Taylor. It's about time someone in this family succeeded on their own terms. I am, for the first time in my life, completely and utterly free. The silence from their end is a peaceful, welcome balm. My life, my success, my future, it's all my own, built not in spite of their neglect, but because of it. And that, I have come to realize, is the sweetest and most satisfying revenge of all.